Welcome to another episode of the X-Files, the Divorce and Separation podcast with me, Alex Wynn, and my esteemed friend and colleague, Liza Friedwald.
Hello.
We are family lawyers for our sins, and we've put this little podcast together to give some information out there for people who either are interested in family law or maybe going through that or know somebody who is. But just a usual caveat. Used to say caveat a long time ago before I moved to this country. And this is only information. It's not legal advice as such. We can certainly give you legal advice, but you'd have to talk to us individually and work through what's going on in your world because everybody's different. You know that thing at school, everybody's special? Well, it's true in certainly in legal parlance, but please get legal advice for yourself. Right. Saying all of that, what are we talking about today, Liza?
Mediation. And you know what? We're not talking about meditation, which is what I first read when I was looking at the run sheets, and I thought, okay, so mediation, meditation, is it the same thing? No, definitely not.
Well,
meditation is the one where you go, like that.
Well, we're in southeast Queensland. That's not too far away from Byron Bay and all of the hinterland around the back there. So
Totally.
if you want to look at meditation, yeah, there's plenty of podcasts around
It probably
that.
would help for those going through the family
For
law
sure.
case.
Whatever works, works.
But we're talking about mediation today. And that is, again, it's a difficult concept for people to quite understand what it is. It's like a chat. It's like an informal chat, but slightly more formal. And where people get confused, they think that the mediator makes decisions. They don't. It's a little bit more complex than what a lot of people think.
So
And
it's a process, isn't it? That
it
we
is a
deal with
process.
all the time. Yeah.
It's basically a feature, and so it should be, in my opinion, of every family law case, whether it be parenting or property. Because these days, with a parenting matter, unless there's an exception, so it might be urgent or there might be some family violence that means that it makes mediation very difficult, you're going to have to mediate first before you file in a court. Although with property you don't actually have to, it's always recommended that you do because you're going to get to court, and what's the first thing the court's going to say? If you guys attempted to resolve this at a mediation, oh no, Your Honour, the court's not going to take you that seriously until you do try those sorts of things.
In the court that we're talking about, which is the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia, and Divisions 1 and 2,
Yeah.
they have this terrible thing that we did a podcast on recently called the Central Practice Direction. And look, I know, wake up everybody. But there is a big chunk in that makes family dispute resolution and dispute resolution attempts, including mediation, a real central tenet of how to get rid of cases. Right, I don't want to talk about the Central Practice Direction again for a little while.
No one does. No one wants to
Nobody
talk
does.
about that.
But all that means is, as we're saying, mediation, dispute resolution, it's a big part of what we do now. As family lawyers, we guide people through that process. And so we thought it might be helpful just to talk through what does mediation really mean, what's involved, what can I expect, should I agree to it, who should I instruct as the mediator, should I go with a lawyer, what happens, how long will it go, how much will it cost, there's a myriad of things. Right, let's dive in.
Let's start with what it actually is. Let's just say husband, wife going off to see what's called a mediator. You can either have your lawyers with you, you don't have to have your lawyers with you. And a mediator is a third party. It's a third party.
They might be 30.
They could be 30. A third party who is completely independent of the parties. They are not there to decide your case, although you can have these other types of mediations. But we're talking about the general stock standard family law mediation. And they are not there to decide your case. What they're there to do is to try and help the two of you reach agreement. And the best thing about a mediation is that you retain the control. You retain all the power to make your decision. If you do not like what the other side has to say, you say, no, thank you. I'm not taking that offer. If you don't want to agree to what they're wanting to do, or if you want to propose something that you're just not sure whether or not they're going to accept it, you can propose it. It's confidential. It's a process by which you can do a little bit of trial and error. And the mediator, who is completely independent, will guide both of you to try and stick to the issues. So it's things like making sure that we can work out what are the things that you both agree on and what are the things that you don't agree on. and let's tick off as much as we can and see if we can find that common ground first. We're getting that positive frame of mind then, because we're all thinking, oh, actually, we're not as far apart as I thought. I thought that if I said black, he said white, but we've actually found that there are a number of issues that we can actually agree on. And it gets parties into that nice frame of mind. That mediator is there to try and help parties to find that common ground and try and narrow the issues so that you can, in fact, reach an agreement at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And no one's going to force anything on them, on
They
each
won't
party.
know. Now try doing that with a judge, of course. If you're in a courtroom instead and the judge says this is the outcome, you don't go, no, I don't accept that. No, that is the outcome.
Yeah, that's right.
When you're in a mediation, of course, it's a structured form of negotiation with a mediator, and there are different kind of let's call it vibes, different vibes that you get from different mediators. So we wouldn't choose, Bob the mediator to deal with that case. We might choose Jenny the mediator to deal with this case, because they have different skills that they bring, different personalities. And when you get to know your client a little bit more, or if you're doing this yourself, look around and think, I feel I could connect with that person, because it's going to be stressful. It's going to be a long day or a long morning if you just do a half day. It's pretty intense. You're trying to sort out something that you and your ex can't agree on. So inherently there's something sticking you there. And part of that process is try and unravel what actually is it that's stopping from settling. Now, I should say at the start, mediations it's a negotiation phase, but it means it's without prejudice. And that means, so you can't talk about things that have been said in mediation after you leave. If you end up with a written agreement, you can talk about that, absolutely. And that can then go on and become something more formal. But the stuff that you talk about with the mediator and with your lawyer and with the other side, that's all privileged, it's all confidential. The court cannot know about that stuff. That is not to say that you would unknow something that you have heard in the mediation and might think about other ways of getting that into the case. But
be too upfront.
Don't be. Well, that's right. I mean,
that's what I usually tell people. You don't have to be an oversharer at mediation.
But you do need to prepare properly. What's that old business adage? Proper planning prevents poor performance. It just means make sure that before you go into the mediation itself, that enough disclosure has been done. You're never going to get everything absolutely complete, but all the big ticket stuff, you understand well what's going on. So if it's a property one, for example, you might need to get valuations of things done. If they're not agreed, you might need to make sure that you understand what the other person's income level is. That might mean bank statements, it might mean tax returns. But your lawyer will guide you through that. There's a little list of things that the court rules say you must give this information over. That's a great starting point. But you'll be nuanced, you'll have your own life, and so some things will be relevant in some mediations that aren't in others. Be guided by your family lawyer. But it's very important to prepare before you go in. And I think it's usually a good idea to have exchanged some offers at least beforehand, so that what's the gap here? Is it that far apart, or are we really close?
Well, I always think, put forward a decent, reasonable offer before you get to mediation, because there have been times where that offer has been accepted and you've just saved yourself a day of mediation fees, not only with your lawyer, but also the mediator's fees.
Heartbreaking, but true.
But just on that preparation point, one of the things that I wanted to raise is that a lot of the time people will put a lot of emphasis on picking the right mediator. Now, it's important, but it's not critical. So you might be faced with the position that you've put forward 3 mediators, for example, and you said, right, I've done my research. I want mediator A, B, or C, and you can choose. And that's usually how us lawyers will liaise with the other party in terms of trying to reach agreement on who we're going to select for something. There's always these panel selections.
We like our panels. It gives little bit of the impression, at least, of neutrality.
And so what I often see is that we'll put forward this panel, and then the other side will come back with someone that's not on that panel and they want their own specific mediator. And some people think, oh, what's going on here? There's got to be something dodgy about this. But remembering at the end of the day, don't get caught up in those sorts of disputes. Do your research on who that person actually is. They might, in fact, be bringing something decent to the table. They need to be independent anyway. They can't be known to the parties. So adding that fourth one into the mix, try not to get caught up on that sort of question and that issue. And I find so many people do that, and it puts them off in going into the mediation in the first place, going, oh, well, they've rigged the mediation. No one rigs a mediation. It just doesn't happen that way.
You can't, because you decide your own outcome, and that's really the point of it, isn't it? You can't be made to agree to something at a mediation. And look, people sometimes are utterly immovable in these negotiation fests.
Too many times. It's a waste of time.
And that's fine. You don't, if you're the other person and you've been willing to move and you've negotiated in good faith, and all you're hearing is this wall of nothing, I want this or nothing. Well, you've got a simple choice if you're the other person. Say, well, it's nothing then as far as today's concerned.
So, yeah.
Or, dare I say, you might explore your reasons for saying no and thinking, well, is what they're saying such a terrible thing? Can I get this over with? But you do not have to agree. You cannot be made to. If you feel that you're being put under pressure, you should say so. You should say to your lawyer, you should say to the mediator, I'm finding this very hard to deal with. Take a break. Mediations don't have that same structured way of, say, a courtroom. We will adjourn at 1:15, or we will be back at 2:15, or this starts at 10. It's very much your day. And if you are getting somewhere, great. If you feel you're circling the same issue over and over and over again, getting nowhere with it, well, maybe you step away from that issue.
Yeah, park it, move on to another issue.
Not every mediation solves every aspect of every case. Sometimes you'll have a mediation that maybe resolves half the things that you were in dispute about. And you can get those things out of the way. That makes your case half as big when you go on with it. And pound to a penny, you'll get to a solution before too long anyway. I see that quite a bit when a mediation does not resolve on the day, but people have made genuine attempts. And it's not just one of those, I've been made to come here, therefore, I'm here. But somebody who's genuinely trying to get out of it, out of this mess that they're in, but you can't quite agree on the day. Very often in the following weeks, you'll get a deal done. Yeah. And that's far, far better to have decided it for yourselves than to be dragged along to that final court hearing and hearing a judge pull your evidence apart and give the other person what they wanted at the beginning, or worse, even far worse than that, making you having to pay their costs for something.
Well, you can't sit there in the peanut gallery when the judge is giving his judgment and say, sorry, Your Honour, you just got that wrong. That's not right. It's too bad. I'm sorry. There's really not much. If that's the way that the judge has interpreted that evidence, then that's what you're stuck with. And you may not actually like the orders that the judge makes. But I just want to talk about the way that the actual mediation process works if there's been some family violence. Now, that doesn't mean that absolutely every case that alleges family violence is not suitable for mediation. Even the most severe cases where there have been severe allegations of family violence have in fact been successfully mediated. The reason that they can still mediate is a couple of things. Is first of all, we usually conduct a mediation in what we call a shuttle format. So we're not sitting across from each other staring down your ex-husband, or he's not sitting there with his keys to his flashy new Ferrari or something like that and twirling
pictures
them around.
Of the new squeeze on his phone that he's scrolling through.
Yeah, baiting you. There's none of that. You don't see them. And in fact,
sometimes see them.
Well, sometimes
but
you may.
Mostly don't.
In most cases, if you are in person, there will be a room that the mediator will have. The mediator will come into your room and talk to you and your lawyer, and the mediator will talk to the other party. And they'll even try and orchestrate it such that you can't go to the bathroom just yet because they've just gone to the bathroom. So they try and remove all instances where you're actually going to feel uncomfortable.
Stagger the arrival and departure times as well, and the same for lunch breaks and things. Yeah,
that's right. So there is that element of safety being at the forefront of everyone's minds, but not just in terms of physical safety, but also in terms of that emotional safety. A lot of cases these days, we're dealing with coercive control and emotional and financial abuse. And a concept that I've heard recently, lawfare, which is where they're using the systems against each other to actually make people feel worse. And in that instance, when you have a lawyer with you, they're in the background sometimes there to support them, to make them feel comfortable, to speak for them and do all those sorts of things. So when you've got that lawyer in your pocket, you're a little bit more supported when it comes to those sorts of allegations that are raised or discussions that come out.
That's
And
right. We become the voice in the room and the voice with the other lawyer as well. It's really common in a mediation when you don't say see your ex at all in the day. It's very, very likely that if you've both got lawyers, the lawyers will talk to each other and to the mediator together as a separate breakout.
yeah,
And they will be putting your front foot forward for you without you having to do that. So I'll get to know my client's case very well and their concerns, and hopefully my opposite number will have done the same thing. And then we can have a much more sort of frank and open conversation, bearing in mind this is all without prejudice, of course, which doesn't have the element of emotion. And I think that's what lawyers can really bring to a mediation, why it's very useful to have them.
And I also see that in a lot of instances, it's really important that when you have your intake session with the mediator, a mediator will normally ask for an intake session with
Which
each of the
is what,
parties.
again, just for somebody who's not familiar with that?
Basically, just a very quick chat. It's usually on the phone. Doesn't go for more than about half an hour normally. They don't necessarily want to talk to the lawyers. They want to talk to the parties, or they want to receive a form from the parties. It's really important that if you are exposed to family violence in your relationship, that you let the mediator know and let them know the type of violence, that it's not just a case of it being physical violence. If, you accuse them of being a narcissist and they're gaslighting you at every chance they get, it's important that you let the mediator know, because sometimes parties will say to the mediator, I want you to tell her these things, A, B, C, D, and E. And they might be really offensive and quite disturbing and unsettling for that person to hear. Now, the mediator, yes, they are a mouthpiece and they'll convey information, but if it's abusive or if that crosses that line of good behaviour, they're not necessarily going to pass that sort of information on. But they're going to need to know if you are subject to that, because they may think there's nothing wrong with them saying that. They might be saying, well, that's just them asserting their case, but not realising that you're actually quite sensitive to those particular issues. It might be to do with mental health. Husband says, I've been to psychiatrists and they said I'm fine, but you're the problem. It's not necessarily a helpful line for a mediator to convey to the other side,
No.
especially if that's the way that the relationship has gone on for the last 20 years.
So the intakes are very helpful for giving that sort of as a flagging moment for the mediator. And you mentioned as well, they use forms quite a lot as well. We use intake forms.
Yeah.
The mediator will send to your lawyer, here's a form, it might be 5 pages long, it might be 20, it doesn't really matter. It's who you are, it's what's this about, what are your concerns, and that's really where the mediator's eyes are going to get drawn to. What are your real concerns about this? What are your worries? What are your hopes? And what are your fears? Those are the things that will drive the outcome and help them know if there are, as you're saying, elements of some overbearing control, some coercive control, financial abuse, withholding, who knows? That's the opportunity to get that out there. That brings me on to something else which we often prepare or we see prepared, and this is on a case-by-case basis, but a mediation position paper. There go the eyes. This is a document that your lawyers would typically prepare on your behalf, setting out your case in its optimum. Here are all the things that we're talking about. This is the outcome that I want. This is why I should get it. Now, I've seen those things drafted as though they are submissions to go to a judge after a lengthy trial. And they are very often swapped about at the very last minute. It might be the night before or the morning of. And if you send through to somebody, your client, as we'd be obligated to say to our client, do you want to look at this? And the mediator, do you want this is being shared? It's going to Well, I find they can upset a mediation's prospects of succeeding.
Throwing a grenade at them.
Yeah, that's
Just
right. It's
stupid.
character assassination. The night before, you're trying to get somebody to come on board with a negotiation. You're going to a mediation to get an outcome, not hopefully to try and promulgate this into a nasty, messy court case. You're trying to sort out a couple of problems there. They might be big problems. They're not going to be helped by throwing mud at somebody the night before, getting your lawyer, who's oh so clever and oh so wonderful, to write what effectively is a submission from counsel to a judge. It helps nobody. And I like you, I mean, I roll my eyes when I see some of them. I like a nice, succinct way of looking at it. If it's about money and property, please prepare a balance sheet. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Don't go in without
I
knowing what you're talking about.
When I get those position papers, I just say thank you. That's an advice on evidence from their perspective that I'm going to be able to refer to and understand where they're coming from. I understand what case they're running. And if it doesn't settle, well, guess what? I can't unknow those things, can I? I can't unknow where they're going with the case. My view is position papers are rubbish and they should not be used. I get it. There's lots of times you get ordered to prepare a position paper, but they are just, they're wrong on every level. It's in the heading. It's position paper. Mediation is not about holding your position. It's about moving from your position. So if you come to mediation, and a lot of people do with their position paper that their lawyer has drafted very nicely for them, and that's what they think that they're going to get. And that's what they think that they're going to walk in with that. This is not a minute of order that you're submitting to a judge for approval on. This is the starting point. And if your position paper is so far off the planet in terms of the range of what is going to be likely to be accepted, what's the point in having your lawyer draft a document like that? If anything, I would be drafting a document, as Alex said before, you draft your balance sheet. It's all you really need for property. Draft your balance sheet and an agenda of the issues that need to be discussed.
I think chronology can help too, but that's only a simple chronology. That's
Totally.
birth dates, relationship dates, kids dates, get
Purchased
together,
house on this
separate,
date.
divorce date. It gives you that structural framework. How long was this relationship? Then you've got what is there to talk about.
That's right.
And look, if there is a most recent offer, I'll probably put that in as well. Bob offered this, Freddie offered that.
It really needs to be a case of, if you're preparing a document because the mediator wants something to understand the case, give them a one-page dot point summary of what the issues are and how you propose to resolve them, rather than a position statement that says, oh, because of this particular case. Half the time I turn up to a mediation, I'm not there to argue the law. I'm there to try and find what is that magic number that's going to make this whole case go away. And that's, for most people, what they want to know. What is that dollar figure that I have to pay to her to make her go away? And that's the end of the story. And so what you need to do is you need to think creatively and then work a way around, okay, so we can't agree on the value. Well, how about, how far apart are we on the value? Can we just say, let's meet somewhere in the middle? Are we $10,000 apart on the value of this property? Can't we just say it's meet $5,000 each in between? You've got to think sensibly.
I know there's a famous book that says never meet in the middle when it comes to negotiation theory.
I don't care
Look, that's all very well and good if you're dealing with millions of dollars. But if you're dealing with like a typical family law situation when, the valuation of the family home maybe hasn't been agreed, but it is what it is anyway. It will only really be tested if you ever sell the place. So take a pragmatic view, because if you're $50,000 apart in the difference there, and the alternative is going off to court, well, I can tell you that the pair of you are going to get rid of that $50,000 difference very quickly in legal fees, and the difference will still be there. So pragmatism, above all, that's what your remediation for, to give yourself some control. And you're right about position papers, of course you are. We've talked about this before at length. The word position in there. When many eons ago, when I was doing my masters, I did mediation as part of that and looked at the theory behind it all. And what it comes down to is you have to peek behind the curtain of what somebody's saying and say, but what do you really care about? You're saying, I want this, I want that, I want the other. I should have it because X, Y, and Z. That's positional rather than going at it from an interest-based basis instead to say, what do I need? What do I need my life to look like after this? How can I get there or close to there? What do the children need in all of this? So thinking about, perhaps the future needs, thinking about what are the real concerns that you have. Now, hopefully the mediator's intake form, which will just be for the mediator, by the way, in most cases, it's not a position statement, so you can be a little bit more free about, I'm concerned he abuses me, or she's always getting at me. I'm never able confident to talk to them. That's for the mediator. You can say whatever you like in that. It's helpful. But when it comes to the mediation itself, if you start the day by saying, I want, I deserve, it's probably not going to settle, and you'll end up with.
Entitled to is a good one.
Well, yeah, aren't we all?
Entitled to 65%. No, you're not.
Hmm.
You are not entitled to anything.
Let's go through maybe some of the reasons that a lot of mediations are very successful, I have to say. So we'll talk about some of the things that we see to derail a mediation. Where do they go wrong? So position papers that are highly positional and aggressive, that's a bad thing to start a mediation off with. What are the other things that you see them falling over for?
If you haven't got agreement on the property pool, that's a massive.
Yeah.
If you can't agree, or at least be close enough to it that you can both work off separate pools. I'm talking about a case, for example, they might be $900,000 apart from one another. That is not going to settle. You cannot settle that case. If you have two separate property pools that are $10,000 apart, well, you probably could still work off that. That's okay.
You'd be nuts not to in many ways because of the cost of going on to litigate.
My general rule is that the biggest regret you can ever have about a mediation is not proposing something that you think might be accepted. You have no idea if it's going to be accepted or not, but you just put it out there. There's no harm in putting it out there and asking the question. Even if it means bidding against yourself, people get stuck on that. Like, I know myself, I hate it when I have to bid against myself. But at the end of the day, if it means that the mediation is stalling and you have one last shot to try and resolve it, make that offer. See what happens. If it's accepted, hurrah. Happy days.
It's like turning up to the ball and not asking somebody to dance, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It is a bit like that. That's a nice way of putting it.
You've got to participate. You have to participate.
Parenting mediations, I think, are the harder ones because they're the ones where everyone wants to dip their toes in. It's trial and error. If you've already got court proceedings on, I always like to, if it's fairly early days, I like to actually enter into interim orders rather than final orders in parenting matters. Just see how it goes. But if you don't have court proceedings on, well, you might want to think about just doing it as a parenting plan, because worst comes to worst, in your parenting plan, you say, if there's a dispute and we're not really happy with all of this, well, we'll come back to another mediation and see what we can do, rather than you can agree on those sorts of things, and it just saves you from being forced to take that court action.
I think the short-term arrangements will also work better for very young children whose lives are a little less clear at that point.
Yep.
You don't know what they're going to be into, what their needs might be.
Yep.
So preschool and young primary children, shorter term plans are usually better because they're changing so much at that time. When kids get to be a little bit older, late primary, high school, well, you should be able to lock in details around that. You know who your kids are by that point. You should know what's going on with them at school and socially and educationally. You can deal with that. Can't do it so much with young kids. So I tend to see that a bit more often. Parenting plans for very young kids at an early stage, then making it more firm and more clear with court orders as the process unfurls a bit. After a few months have gone by, you've tried it for 12 months or something. But yeah, build into those deals, within the mediation. We can't agree everything. That's okay. But maybe you can agree a whole bunch of things, and you write those things down and you have them, whether it's a plan, whether if it's monetary, you have those things formally agreed and you act on those. You're reducing the things that you're squabbling over. That should, in any case, make things a little bit easier for both of you. It'll take some of the pressure off. The case becomes smaller. The overall legal costs will be smaller even if you ended up in a trial. But there's every chance that you've got of settling it after the day is finished.
Yeah.
But the failure of the cases to settle, it's not always due to the entrenched view of one person. I mean, very often is. But it could just be that the questions are very difficult and it takes more than one day for that to trickle down through the mind and to turn it around properly. I think it's almost acts as a reset sometimes, the mediation. People have been separated and they've been squabbling for many months, sometimes years, without getting to a resolution. And maybe a court case has started, or maybe it's going to. Mediation itself acts then as a bit of a reset for you to say, okay, this is turn the way that I need to think about this away from those ghastly positional situations to what's really happening. What do we all really need out of this? I like to think I'm very outcome driven when I meet a client and I hear what's going on with them for the first time. Think about where should this finish? What would be a good outcome for everybody concerned here, most especially my client, of course, rather than going, we follow this process. A mediation does have, sometimes a structured process, but it's totally up to you, isn't it, as to what you're comfortable with doing.
Yeah. So you'll be guided by the way the mediator wants to run the mediation. But at the end of the day, if you're not feeling comfortable, and I've called off many a mediation halfway through the session saying, nope, this has just crossed the line. My client's not happy anymore. She's feeling pressured, or she's feeling upset, or it's just all too much. Because sometimes the timing of the mediation might be too early. Parties may not be at the same stage of the breakup. And because I do find a lot of parties, people come to me and they say, oh, we've been to mediation. When? You've only been separated for 3 weeks. When did you do mediation? What possibly could you have talked about in that time? And then they're surprised that it doesn't succeed. You do need to get all your ducks in a row and prepare properly before a mediation. And if you can resolve it, great. If you can't, see what you can resolve. See where your common ground is. And then worst comes to worst, call your lawyer and make sure that,
Definitely.
they're ready to go.
That's not advice, of course, but it's really great information, and I completely
It's all information.
endorse that. All information.
I don't do the advice thing. I do the information.
We can do the advice for you if you reach out to us and engage us. But otherwise, please feel free to listen. That's a lot to take in over mediation. I think the takeaway maybe is you really need to embrace it as part of your tools to getting this problem solved. We do it all the time. We see much success with mediation. No two mediators are going to ever conduct the things the same way. So it's hard to say this is what your day will look like, because it might be by video, it might be in person, but it's a great process, and it's a real opportunity for you to decide for yourself your own outcome. So, wow, huge. Thanks very much.
Snacks. I forgot to mention.
Bring snacks. That's really good advice.
Yeah.
Bring something to eat.
That's not legal advice. That's just general advice.
Practically,
just bring
people
snacks.
start to lose concentration about 11 o'clock.
Totally.
People are worried, haven't had breakfast. Bring a coffee.
Anyway, that was the part I forgot to mention, because I was just sitting there listening to my stomach rumble going,
There you go. That is good
hungry.
advice. That's real advice.
Cute.
Bring snacks and drinks.
Yeah, certain drinks, not all types of drinks.
Yeah, soft drinks, coffee. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We have definitely been the X-Files today.
We have definitely been X-Files.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.